The African sun burned down on a vast savanna, its rays searing through the thick canopy of trees that dotted the dense, untamed forest. Beneath that canopy, in the heart of the jungle, lived a mighty pride of lions, known by many as the Six. These were no ordinary lions. They were born into a bloodline built on strength, loyalty, and ruthless dominance. And at the center of this bloodline stood two brothers, Jabari and Zuri. Jabari was the elder of the two, strong, wise, and already feared by many within the animal kingdom. His golden mane was thick and regal, his presence alone commanding respect. Zuri, on the other hand, was younger, quicker, and fiercely determined. Where Jabari was calm and collected, Zuri was brash and hungry for power. Together, they ruled the African forest like kings, unstoppable, indomitable, and feared by every creature that lived there. But despite their shared blood and the kingdom they had built together, there was a darkness brewing. It wasn't a storm in the sky or a shift in the seasons. It was something far more dangerous. It was a seed of ambition planted deep in Zuri's heart. Over time, the younger brother began to covet more than just his position in the pride. He wanted it all, the throne, the land, and the power that came with it. And, like all lions who thirsted for the crown, Zuri knew that in the jungle, there was no room for weakness. The pride, the Six, was more than just a group of lions. It was a kingdom. They controlled everything. The waterholes, the hunting grounds, the very life force of forest. And like any kingdom, there was a line of succession, one that Jabari had always assumed would be his to hold. But Zuri's ambition had taken root, and the peaceful days of their reign were numbered. The forest around them was alive with the sounds of birds, the rustle of leaves in the breeze, and the distant calls of animals. But the peace would not last. Zuri's mind had become consumed with thoughts of power. It began as small, whispered doubts, quiet murmurs of discontent. He watched as Jabari, confident and steadfast, took the role of leader with pride. Zuri, however, felt slighted. He was just as strong, just as capable, and maybe, he thought, even stronger than Jabari. One day, while the pride slept beneath the shade of an ancient baobab tree, Zuri began to plot. He had watched his brother for years, studied his every move, and now he knew exactly how to seize control. But Jabari was not a fool. He saw the hunger in Zuri's eyes. He felt the subtle shifts in behavior, Zuri's subtle defiance, the way he started leading hunts, the way he subtly gathered the younger lions to his side. There was no question about it. Zuri was planning something, and Jabari knew that sooner or later it would come to a head. It started with small skirmishes, disagreements over territory, over leadership, over the best places to hunt. At first, it was nothing more than a few growls and sharp glares. But it didn't take long before the tension escalated. Jabari and Zuri, once brothers bound by blood and loyalty, now stood on opposite sides of a growing rift. The tension within the pride began to boil over. The younger lions, those who followed Zuri, became more brazen, openly challenging Jabari's authority. Zuri's influence over the pride grew stronger with each passing day, and Jabari began to feel the weight of his brother's rebellion pressing down on him. Then, one evening, as the sun began to set over the horizon, the moment that had been building for months finally arrived. Jabari and Zuri stood face to face in the clearing at the center of their territory. The other members of the pride gathered around, the air thick with the smell of sweat and tension. "This is it, Jabari." Zuri's voice was low, but there was no mistaking the fire behind it. "The pride has grown weak under your rule. It's time for a change. It's time for me to lead." Jabari's eyes narrowed, his stance unchanging. "You've lost your way, Zuri. This isn't about strength. This is about family, about loyalty. You're willing to destroy everything we've built for power. That's not how we lead." But Zuri was beyond reason. His hunger for power had consumed him completely. And in that moment, the bond that once held the brothers together shattered. With a roar that shook the very ground beneath them, Zuri lunged at Jabari, and the fight for the throne began. The clash between the two lions was fierce, their roars echoing through the forest like thunder. Each blow they struck was a reminder of their shared past, of the blood that ran thick between them. Jabari's strength was unmatched, but Zuri's ferocity was wild and untamed. It was clear that this battle would not end without one of them falling. As the fight raged on, Jabari's mind raced. He knew that Zuri had to be stopped, but he couldn't bring himself to kill his own brother. And yet, in the jungle, there could only be one ruler. There could be only one king. The fight for the throne had begun, and neither lion would stop until the other was dead. The battle continued long into the night, with both brothers fighting fiercely, their blood mingling in the dirt beneath their feet. The future of the pride, the future of their kingdom, hung in the balance. But as dawn approached, one thing was certain. The African forest would never be the same again. As the first light of dawn pierced the thick canopy of trees, the aftermath of the brutal fight between the two lion brothers became painfully evident. The forest, once filled with the sounds of life and harmony, was now eerily silent. Only the distant cries of birds echoed through the trees, a sharp contrast of ferocity that had erupted the night before. Zuri lay motionless on the ground, his once golden mane now matted with blood, his body battered and broken. His chest heaved with ragged breaths as he slowly recovered from the violent clash. Jabari, standing over him, was equally bloodied but still very much alive. The weight of the battle had taken a toll on both of them, but Jabari knew it wasn't over. It couldn't be. The fight had been intense, raw, and primal. Jabari's claws had torn into Zuri's flesh, leaving deep gashes across his brother's body. But it was clear now that Jabari hadn't won merely by strength. He had won by sheer will. He had never intended to kill Zuri. He had only wanted to stop him from claiming the throne. Yet the devastation of their struggle had left scars deeper than any wound. Jabari slowly stepped back, his chest rising and falling as he watched Zuri struggle to rise to his feet. There was no victor here, no true winner. The battle had torn their pride in two, and now, the future of the six was uncertain. Zuri's gaze was venomous as he glared up at his brother. His pride was wounded, his ego shattered, but his thirst for power had not dimmed. "You think you've won, Jabari?" Zuri spat, his voice thick with contempt. "You've only made the path to the throne more treacherous. If you truly think this ends here, you're a fool." Jabari stood silently, his eyes hard as he watched Zuri struggle to rise. He could feel the weight of his brother's words, the anger and betrayal that still simmered between them. But Jabari had made his choice. The pride, the territory, and the very fabric of their kingdom all depended on him now. He could not afford to lose. "I won't let you destroy this pride, Zuri," Jabari said, his voice firm but tinged with sorrow. "You have become something unrecognizable. You've lost your way, and I can't follow you anymore." Zuri let out a growl of frustration, his claws digging into the dirt. He was humiliated, but the fire of his ambition refused to extinguish. "You've always been the noble one, Jabari, the one who played by the rules. But the world isn't kind to those who are weak. I will take what is mine, even if it means tearing this pride apart." Jabari's heart clenched at the words. Zuri had once been his closest ally, the brother who stood by his side through countless battles, sharing the victories and the hardships. But now, that brother was lost, consumed by his lust for power. And the cruel truth of the jungle was that once a lion turned against its own kind, it became a force of destruction, a threat to everything it once protected. As the brothers exchanged bitter words, the pride watched from a distance. The young lions who had once looked up to Zuri now saw the truth of his ambitions. They had followed him, believing in his vision of strength and leadership. But now, with the violent spectacle before them, they were left questioning their loyalties. Would they stand with Jabari, the steady and wise leader who had shown them peace and unity? Or would they follow the new, dangerous path that Zuri had paved, one that promised blood and fury in exchange for power? The first signs of division within the pride began to show. The older lions, those who had served Jabari faithfully for years, gathered around him, forming a protective circle. But there were whispers among the younger lions, those who had grown enamored with Zuri's charisma and fiery ambition. The pride was beginning to split, and the once unified kingdom of the six was on the brink of civil war. Zuri, still struggling to rise, caught sight of the shifting loyalties in his pride. His eyes burned with fury as he realized that his influence was slipping away. He had underestimated his brother's ability to unite the pride, but he wasn't about to give up so easily. With a final snarl, Zuri turned away, disappearing into the dense foliage of the forest. His pride might have been fractured, But he would not be broken. Jabari watched his brother retreat into the shadows, the weight of what had just transpired settling heavily on his shoulders. He knew that Zuri would return, angrier and more determined than ever. The forest would once again become the battleground for a war between brothers, and Jabari couldn't help but wonder if there was any way to avoid the coming storm. But there was no turning back now. Jabari had won the battle, but the war for the throne was far from over. His strength would be tested, and the very foundation of their pride would be torn apart in ways that no one could predict. The price of power had already been paid, and the cost was high. As the sun rose higher in the sky, Jabari stood alone in the clearing, his mind heavy with the burden of leadership. He knew that there was no way to stop the coming war between the brothers, but he also knew that he had no choice but to fight. The survival of the pride depended on it. The reign of the Six was at its breaking point, and only one brother would remain standing at the end. The tension in the air was thick, suffocating, as the pride members scattered in different directions, their loyalties torn. The sun hung high in the sky, casting long shadows across the dense underbrush of the African forest. The once united family of lions was now splintering under the weight of ambition and bloodshed. The winds carried the scent of betrayal, and the sounds of conflict were just beginning to echo through the forest. Jabari had always believed that unity was the strength of their pride. The Six had lived as one, brothers who ruled with justice and strength, taking care of their territory and protecting the weak. But now, as the dust settled from the clash with Zuri, Jabari found himself alone at the center of a pride that was no longer cohesive. The pride's foundation was cracking, and every lion had to choose a side. This was no longer just about leadership. It was about survival. The young lions, those who had looked up to Zuri for his fierce confidence and ability to command respect, were the first to question Jabari's leadership. They whispered to each other in the shadows, their eyes filled with doubt. Zuri had been a charismatic one, the lion who had promised them power, glory, and dominance over all others. But Jabari, though wise and strong, was a reminder of a time when things were simpler. His quiet authority, grounded in fairness, no longer seemed to satisfy the restless hunger for power that simmered in the hearts of the younger lions. A small group of Zuri's loyalists approached the pride's central clearing, where Jabari stood, his head high, watching them warily. These lions had been close to Zuri, and now they were aligning themselves against their once leader, their eyes filled with the same burning desire for supremacy that had driven Zuri. They had seen the blood spilled, witnessed the violence, and now they hungered for it. It was clear they would follow whoever could give them what they wanted, control over the forest. "Jabari, we need to talk," one of the older lions from Zuri's faction called out. His voice was calm, almost too calm. He was no fool. He knew what was at stake, and he knew that his loyalty to Zuri would put him at odds with Jabari. Jabari nodded stiffly, his piercing gaze fixed on the lion who spoke. "What is it?" he asked, his voice deep but with a note of weariness. He didn't have the energy for threats or politics. He had just survived a battle against his own flesh and blood, but the reality of leadership weighed heavily on him, and he knew he had to face whatever was coming. "We want to know where you stand," the lion said, stepping closer to Jabari. "Zuri is gone, but his vision isn't. He gave us a future, a place in the world where we could rise. If you are the true leader, you need to show us that we're not just tools in your fight for survival." Jabari's heart sank. He knew what they wanted: power. Zuri's vision was one of conquest, of claiming what was theirs by right of blood and war. Jabari had always believed in a different kind of strength, one that was based on unity and respect. But in this moment, he realized that to hold the pride together, he might need to show them a different kind of power. He couldn't afford to back down. "Not now. I stand for what's best of this pride," Jabari said, his voice firm. "And that means keeping us together. If you want power, I can't promise you glory, but I can promise you survival. The jungle is brutal, and we will face more enemies than just each other." The group of young lions seemed to consider his words, but doubt lingered in their eyes. They had seen Zuri's ambition firsthand. They knew what it meant to strike first and ask questions later. And now, they were uncertain whether Jabari's version of leadership was enough. Meanwhile, the older lions, the ones who had remained loyal to Jabari through thick and thin, gathered behind him, forming a protective circle. They were silent but unwavering, their loyalty to their leader clear. They had seen Jabari's strength in battle, and they knew his heart. The pride might be fractured, but they still believed in him. Zuri's absence had left a void, but that void was quickly filled with the raw tension of an impending war. Jabari understood now that he couldn't simply keep the peace. He had to be prepared to fight, not only to protect his place as leader, but to ensure the survival of the entire pride. But as the sun began to set, a new danger emerged. A rival pride, drawn by the scent of weakness, was encroaching on their territory. The lions of the forest knew that power was everything, and with the six divided, it was only a matter of time before their enemies smelled blood. Jabari knew this battle would be unlike any other. It wouldn't just be a fight for territory or survival. It would be a battle for the very soul of the pride. Would they remain united in the face of this threat? Or would Zuri's followers continue to fracture the pride further, seeking dominance no matter the cost? The winds howled through the trees as Jabari stood tall, his eyes scanning the horizon. The night was coming, and with it, a storm. He could feel the weight of leadership heavy on his shoulders. But he couldn't falter now. If he was to survive, if his pride was to survive, he would have to fight harder than ever before. The divide within the pride was deepening, and the wolves, figuratively and literally, were circling. Jabari's next steps would determine whether the six would reign supreme, or be consumed by the very bloodshed that started it all. The air was thick with anticipation. As dusk descended on the African forest, an eerie quiet settled over the land, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. The distant sound of animals settling for the night were far too peaceful, too calm for the looming storm. Jabari stood atop a ridge, his eyes fixed on the horizon where a group of rival lions, led by a male known as Seko, had been spotted. His pride was in disarray, and now the threat from the outside world was undeniable. Seko was a lion with a reputation, ruthless and ambitious, much like Zuri had been. His pride had grown powerful over the years, and his desire for dominance was matched only by his willingness to destroy anyone in his way. He knew the six were vulnerable. The infighting among Jabari's brothers had left the pride weak, and he could smell the opportunity to strike. Jabari's mind raced. The battle for control within the pride had taken its toll, but this external threat was a different kind of enemy. The rival pride wasn't just seeking a fight. It was seeking blood. They would kill if they had to, and Jabari wasn't sure how much longer his pride would hold. The lion who had been questioning Jabari's leadership earlier, Kofi, approached with a grim expression. His body was tense, his fur ruffled by the cooling evening breeze. The other lions who had once supported Zuri were close behind him, their eyes narrow, filled with anticipation. They wanted power, and now they had the chance to prove their loyalty to the new leader. But Jabari knew that some of them were still uncertain, still swayed by the memory of Zuri's promises of glory. "I can hear them," Kofi muttered, glancing toward the darkening forest. "Seko's pride is getting closer. We'll need to act soon if we're to stand any chance of defending our territory." Jabari nodded slowly, trying to steady his mind. The last thing he wanted was to lead his pride into a battle that would further divide them. But there was no choice. The rival pride would not back down. If Jabari didn't act now, his entire kingdom would fall into chaos. He turned to the lions who still stood by him, his loyal followers. "We cannot let them take our land. We must stand strong, united. There is no room for division, no room for doubt." The younger lions, eager to prove themselves, growled in agreement, their muscles tense in preparation for the coming fight. But Jabari's gaze lingered on the older members of the pride, the ones who had seen the battles of the past and knew the harsh realities of war. They were quiet, their expressions somber. "We can't afford to make mistakes," one of the older lions, Amani, said in a low voice. "Seko's pride is fierce, and they won't hesitate to kill anyone in their way, whether it's an enemy or cub." The mention of cubs struck a chord within Jabari. He had watched over the young ones, ensuring their safety and well-being. The cubs were the future of the pride, and they were vulnerable. He couldn't risk losing them, no matter what the cost. He would fight to the death to protect them. "Do you think they'll come in force?" Jabari asked, his voice hardening. "Will they wait for us to make the first move?" Amani shook his head. Seko's pride is too bloodthirsty to wait. They've been watching us for days, waiting for the right moment. They'll come at us with everything they have. We'll need to be ready. The reality of the battle ahead weighed heavily on Jabari's mind. His pride had already been weakened by internal strife, and now an external threat loomed over them like a shadow. But he couldn't allow fear to cloud his judgment. This was their home, their territory, and if they didn't defend it, they would lose everything. The forest was alive with the sounds of the approaching lions. Seko's pride was drawing near, their roars growing louder with each passing moment. The time for hesitation was over. Jabari's body tensed, his muscles coiling in preparation for the fight ahead. He had faced many battles in his life, but none had felt so personal. This wasn't just about defending their land. It was about defending the very soul of the pride. Form ranks. Jabari commanded, his voice strong and steady. Prepare yourselves. Tonight, we fight for our survival. The lions of the pride gathered around him, their eyes burning with determination. There was no room for uncertainty now. They had to face this threat head-on, or they would perish. Each lion knew their role in the coming battle, their movements practiced and efficient. They would fight as one, because if they didn't, they wouldn't fight at all. Seko's pride emerged from the trees, their eyes glowing in the darkness. They moved with purpose, their growls filling the air like a storm rolling in. Jabari's heart pounded in his chest, but he stood tall. He would not back down. He would lead his pride through this battle, no matter the cost. The clash was deafening. The sound of roaring lions and slashing claws filled the night as the two prides collided in a fury of blood and chaos. Jabari's teeth sank into the throat of one of Seko's followers, his strength and fury unmatched. His pride fought valiantly, each lion giving their all to protect their land, their families, and their legacy. But the battle was far from over. With each strike, Jabari could feel the weight of the decision he had made to lead his pride into this conflict. His heart ached with the knowledge that some of these lions would not survive. The forest was soaked in blood, and the night seemed to stretch on forever. Seko's pride was relentless, and Jabari knew that this battle would determine the future of the six. If they won, they would stand victorious, unified and strong. But if they lost, everything would crumble. The land would be taken, the pride would fall, and the bloodshed would be endless. As the fight raged on, Jabari's thoughts turned to his brothers, the lions he had once trusted, once loved. They had betrayed him, fought against him, and now they were all bound by the same cruel fate. Only time would tell if they would emerge from the darkness or be consumed by it. The night was filled with chaos as the battle between the two prides unfolded under a canopy of stars. Jabari's heart raced with every strike, every roar, every moment of bloodshed. The forest that had once been a place of peace, a sanctuary for his pride, now felt like a battlefield, soaked with the blood of the fallen. Jabari's claws raked across the fur of an opponent, a young male from Seko's pride, who fought with desperation in his eyes. But there was no time for mercy. Jabari could feel the weight of the moment pressing on him. The future of his pride hung in the balance, and each passing second could mean the difference between survival and annihilation. As the fight raged on, Jabari found himself facing Seko, the leader of the rival pride. Seko's dark mane flowed like a storm cloud, his eyes blazing with the fury of battle. He was a powerful lion, his body built for combat, and his strength was unmatched. Jabari could see the bloodlust in his eyes, the same bloodlust that had driven him to challenge Zuri in the first place. "You should have known better than to cross me, Jabari," Seko growled, his voice thick with malice. "You were weak before and you're weak now. Your pride will fall, just like your brother's." Jabari's chest tightened with the sting of Seko's words, but he refused to back down. "You don't know anything about strength," he shot back, his voice filled with conviction. "Strength isn't in tearing others down. It's in building something that lasts." Seko roared, his fangs flashing as he lunged at Jabari, claws extended. The two lions collided in a whirlwind of fury, teeth clashing, bodies crashing into the earth. Jabari's mind was a blur of instinct as he fought with everything he had. He was tired, his body sore from the previous battles. But he couldn't stop. Not now. As the fight between the two leaders continued, Jabari could hear the sounds of his pride struggle around him. Some of his lions were faring well, pushing back the invaders, while others were faltering under pressure. The fate of his pride weighed heavily on Jabari's shoulders. He had promised them victory, but as the minutes stretched on, he couldn't help but wonder if he had led them into a battle they couldn't win. For a brief moment, Jabari's mind wandered back to the early days of his reign, when everything had seemed so much simpler. He had been filled with idealism, thinking that he could unite his pride, lead them into a future of prosperity. But now, as he fought for his life, he realized how naive he had been. Leadership was not about dreams and promises. It was about survival, and survival came at a cost. Seko's fangs sank into Jabari's shoulder, and the pain jolted him back to the present. He roared in pain, but with a surge of adrenaline, he retaliated. His claws slashed across Seko's face, drawing blood, and the rival leader staggered back, momentarily disoriented. Jabari seized the opportunity. With a mighty roar, he lunged at Seko, tackling him to the ground. The two lions rolled across the earth, each fighting for dominance. But Jabari was fueled by something more than just a desire to win. He was fighting for his pride, for the future of the Six. He had to win. He could not let Seko's bloodthirsty ambition take everything he had worked for. With one final, desperate strike, Jabari sank his teeth into Seko's throat, his powerful jaws clamping down. Seko let out a strangled roar, his body thrashing beneath Jabari's grip. But it was no use. Jabari held on, refusing to let go. Seko's struggles grew weaker, his breath becoming ragged, until finally, with a final shudder, he went limp. Seko was dead. Jabari stood over the fallen lion, breathing heavily, his body trembling from the intensity of the battle. The forest was still, the only sounds of ragged breaths of the surviving lions. The bloodshed was over, but the cost had been high. Jabari's body was covered in cuts and bruises, and his pride had lost many of its members. The price of victory had been steep, but it was a price they had no choice but to pay. As the last of Seko's pride scattered into the darkness, Jabari looked around at his remaining lions. Some were wounded. Others were mourning the loss of their fallen comrades. The battle had been brutal, but they had won. They had held their ground. And yet, Jabari couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. Victory felt hollow, as if the war had drained something vital from the heart of his pride. He turned away from the battlefield, his eyes seeking the horizon. The forest, once filled with life and promise, now felt like a tomb. Jabari's heart was heavy with the weight of his choices, his leadership, and the lives that had been lost. This was the cost of survival, the price that had to be paid to protect the future of his pride. But even as doubt lingered in his mind, Jabari knew one thing for certain. The reign of the Six was not over. It had just begun. The first rays of dawn broke through the canopy, casting a soft golden glow over the battlefield. The once vibrant forest now stood eerily silent, broken only by the occasional rustling of leaves as the surviving lions limped away from the scene of carnage. Jabari stood at the center, his body battered and bruised, his mind clouded by exhaustion and sorrow. The pride had won, but at what cost? The victory felt bitter, like a dark omen, marking the beginning of an era that would forever be defined by bloodshed. Jabari's eyes scanned the remnants of his pride. Some limped away to tend to their wounds, while others huddled in small groups, mourning the loss of brothers and sisters they would never see again. He could feel the weight of their grief pressing down on him. He had led them into this battle, and now they were left to pick up the pieces. The future of the Six had been secured, but the scars of this day would be carried for generations. Zuri, his sister, and the true heart of the pride, walked up beside him. Her eyes were filled with both pride and sorrow as she looked over the fallen. She had fought beside Jabari, her strength unwavering, but even she couldn't mask the heaviness in her heart. She had seen too much death, too much destruction. "You did what you had to do," she said softly, her voice tinged with both respect and concern. "But we've lost so much." Jabari's gaze remained fixed on the ground, his thoughts tangled in the chaos of the past few hours. He could still hear the roars, the clash of teeth and claws, the scent of blood that had filled the air. He could still feel the weight of Seko's death beneath his paws. It was a victory, yes, but it felt like a hollow one, as if something essential had been taken from him in the process. "I know," Jabari replied quietly. But was it worth it, Zuri? Was it worth all this? Zuri didn't answer immediately. She knew the question wasn't just about the battle. It was about the future. The future of their pride, their land, and everything they had worked to build. She, too, had heard the whispers of dissent among the younger lions. Their pride was growing weary. They had seen too many battles, too much blood spilled, and they were questioning whether Jabari's vision for the Six was worth the sacrifices that came with it. "We will rebuild," Zuri said after a pause, her voice strong. "We've been through hard times before, and we'll get through this. But we need to remember why we fight. We fight not for dominance, but for survival. We fight because it's the only way to protect what's ours." Jabari nodded, though his heart felt heavy with doubt. He had led his pride with strength, with fury, but now he wondered if there was another way. The constant fighting, the endless wars over territory and pride, had drained them all. It had turned their once peaceful forest into a place of endless conflict, where the only law was the survival of the strongest. Jabari had always believed that strength was the key to leadership, but now he wondered if there was more to it than just power. As the day wore on, Jabari and Zuri walked among the survivors, offering comfort and healing where they could. The lionesses, though strong, were not immune to the weight of loss. Several of the cubs had been killed in the battle, their tiny bodies torn apart by the violence of the war. Jabari's heart ached as he looked at the grieving mothers. He had promised them protection, but what had he given them in return? Even though victory had been secured, the pride had been left fractured, with scars that would never heal. Jabari knew that the real battle was just beginning, the battle to restore the pride's unity, to heal the wounds that had been inflicted not just by Seko's ambition, but by their own internal struggles, was a far greater challenge than any physical war. A few days after battle, as the pride gathered near the river to drink, Jabari stood on a hill overlooking the scene. The forest seemed quieter now, as if even nature itself was mourning the loss. The once bustling territory had become a place of reflection, a place where Jabari could confront the decisions he had made. His thoughts drifted back to his brothers, the original six who had been his companions since birth. They had been united by blood, by a shared vision, but now that vision seemed distant, almost unreachable. Zuri joined him on the hill, standing beside her brother in silence. "What now, Jabari?" she asked, her voice soft but steady. Jabari took a deep breath, his gaze still fixed on the forest below. He had always believed in the power of the pride, in the strength of the six. But now, with so many lives lost and so many more at risk, he wasn't sure if the old ways would still work. The forest was changing, and perhaps it was time for the pride to change with it. "We rebuild," Jabari said finally, his voice carrying a new resolve. "But this time we rebuild with purpose. We need to unite our pride in a way we've never done before. Not through bloodshed, but through trust, through understanding. We can't keep living in fear of our enemies. We need to look within, to strengthen the bonds that tie us together." Zuri nodded, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. That's what the six were always meant to be, wasn't it? More than just warriors. A family. Jabari smiled softly, the weight of his thoughts beginning to lift. Perhaps there was a way forward, a way to build a future for the six that didn't rely on endless conflict. But it would take time, and it would take sacrifices. For now, though, they had survived, and that in itself was something worth fighting for. The days after the battle were long and grueling for the six. Jabari, though physically exhausted, could not rest. Every day, he walked among his pride, speaking with each lion, listening to their concerns, and trying to piece together the fractured unity that had once defined them. The forest had changed. No longer was it the vibrant, lively place of their youth. Now, it stood as a battlefield, a constant reminder of what had been lost. Jabari knew the pride could not continue like this. They could not thrive under constant war and division. Something had to change, but he wasn't sure how to lead them toward that change. His confidence had been shaken, and for the first time in years, doubt began to creep into his mind. Had his thirst for dominance gone too far? Had he sacrificed the very things that had made the six a force to be reckoned with? In his heart, he knew that the answer was yes. He could see in the eyes of his pride, the uncertainty, the fear. The younger lions, once filled with boundless energy and loyalty, now hesitated at his commands. They no longer followed with the same fierce devotion. The pride's strength had always been built on respect, but that respect had begun to erode in the wake of so much bloodshed. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Jabari called a meeting. His voice echoed through the trees as he gathered the remaining members of the pride around the campfire. Zuri was by his side, offering silent support. Jabari had been thinking long and hard about what needed to be done. He understood that it wasn't just a matter of restoring the pride's physical strength. It was about healing the wounds that had been inflicted upon their spirits. "I know things have been difficult," Jabari began, his voice steady, but the weight of his words hanging heavily in the air. "I led us into a battle that has left us broken, and I have to take responsibility for that. But we are still a pride, and we still have the strength to rebuild." A murmur passed through the lions. Some faces were hopeful, others skeptical. Jabari took a deep breath and continued. "We have always been a family, but we need to be more than just blood relations. We need to trust each other again, truly trust each other. The battles we fought were not just against other lions. They were against the divisions within ourselves." There was a long pause, the only sound the crackling of the fire. Zuri stepped forward, her voice soft but firm. "We've always survived because we stood together," she said, her eyes meeting Jabari's. "But survival alone is not enough. We need to heal, to forgive, and to move forward as a family." The six were never just about dominance. It was about unity. Jabari nodded, a new sense of clarity emerging within him. The pride didn't need more bloodshed. It needed healing. It needed a future where they didn't just survive, but thrive together. The lions had always fought for dominance, but now Jabari realized that the true strength lay in the bonds they forged with each other. The conversation continued into the night, and slowly, the lions began to speak up. Each lion had a voice, each lion had a story, and it was time for those voices to be heard. For the first time in many moons, Jabari felt a sense of hope rising within him. His pride was still here. They were still his family, and they were still willing to follow him, if he led them with understanding, not just strength. The next few weeks were filled with hard work. The lions healed from their wounds, both physical and emotional. Jabari and Zuri worked tirelessly to rebuild trust among the pride, and slowly, the younger lions began to find their place again. They were still wary, but Jabari knew that trust would take time. It would not happen overnight. During this time, the pride began to focus less on power and dominance and more on cooperation. They hunted together with precision, learning to share their kills instead of fighting over scraps. The cubs, too, played a part in the healing process. They reminded the pride of the innocence and joy that had once defined their existence. Their laughter, their playful tumbles, and their sheer curiosity for the world around them brought light into the darkened corners of the forest. But even as the pride began to heal, Jabari could not shake the feeling that something was still amiss. He knew that the forest was changing. Nature was unpredictable, and their territory, though vast, was not invincible. There would always be threats lurking in the shadows. But Jabari had come to understand that strength alone would not keep the pride safe. Unity, trust, and love for each other were the true foundations of their survival. One night, as the pride gathered to rest, Jabari sat apart from the others, lost in thought. He had come to a realization. Leadership was not just about power. It was about sacrifice. True leadership was about serving the pride, putting their needs above his own desires. It was about making choices that would benefit the whole, even if it meant letting go of his own ambitions. He had been blinded by his own thirst for control, but now he saw the truth. Zuri joined him, sensing her brother's unease. "What's on your mind, Jabari?" she asked softly. Jabari turned to her, his gaze filled with a quiet determination. "We're not done yet. The pride is healing, but there is still more to do. We need to protect the future, Zuri. We need to make sure that what we rebuilt doesn't fall apart again." Zuri nodded, understanding the weight of his words. "And we will, together." Despite the progress the pride had made, peace was still a fragile thing. The African forest was vast and full of dangers, and while the six had begun to rebuild their unity, they could not ignore the ever-present threats that loomed on the horizon. The land they ruled was not just theirs alone. Rival lions, hungry for control, lurked in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. Jabari could feel the tension in the air. There was something unsettling about the stillness that had settled over the forest. It was as though the trees themselves were holding their breath, waiting for the inevitable clash. Every crackling leaf, every rustling of the underbrush, sent a chill down his spine. He had no illusions that their enemies had forgotten the six, and with their unity still in the process of being restored, Jabari knew they were vulnerable. The pride's strength was growing again, but the cracks that had formed from years of conflict and betrayal could still be felt. Some lions, especially the younger ones, still whisper among themselves, their loyalty wavering. Jabari had worked hard to earn their trust, but there were moments when the uncertainty in their eyes told him that it wasn't enough. His leadership had been tested before, but this time the stakes were higher. The pride's survival depended not just on strength, but on the ability to defend their territory from those who would tear them apart. One evening, as the sun began to set and the sky turned a deep orange, Jabari felt a disturbance in the air. His instincts screamed that something was wrong. The wind carried a scent, a foreign scent, one that he hadn't smelled in years. It was faint, but it was enough to make his fur stand on end. He knew immediately what it meant. Rival lions were near, and they were closing in on the pride's territory. Jabari called for a meeting, his voice urgent but calm. The pride gathered around him, their faces serious, their eyes searching for guidance. Zuri, ever by his side, noticed the tension in his posture and the sharpness in his gaze. "What is it, Jabari?" she asked, her voice low. "There's a threat," Jabari replied, his voice filled with resolve. "Rival lions are on the move. I've caught their scent. They're coming for us." A murmur spread through the pride. Some lions were nervous, their earlier trust in Jabari beginning to fray again. But Jabari would not let fear take hold. He stood tall, his presence commanding their attention. "We've come too far to let our enemies tear us apart," he said. "We've fought for this pride, for this land, and we will protect it." The younger lions, though wary, nodded in agreement. They were not the same frightened cubs who had fled from their past battles. They had grown stronger, more resilient. But even they knew the gravity of the situation. They had faced enemies before, but this time the pride was different. It was weaker, still healing from the wounds of the past. Jabari could see the uncertainty in their eyes, but he refused to let doubt take root. The pride's survival depended on his leadership, and he was determined to protect them no matter the cost. Over the next few days, the six made preparations. The lions were on high alert, their movements stealthy, their eyes constantly scanning the horizon. The pride worked together, reinforcing their den and fortifying their position within the forest. Jabari and Zuri took charge, making sure the younger lions understood the importance of discipline and unity. They would not let fear or division weaken them now. But the threat wasn't just external. Jabari knew that there were still some within the pride who harbored doubts. Whispers had begun to circulate, and while they were quiet first, Jabari could sense that the seeds of distrust were beginning to sprout. It was a reminder that the battle for dominance was never just about physical strength. It was a battle for the mind and spirit. If the pride couldn't stand together, then all their efforts to rebuild would be in vain. The days turned to weeks, and the scent of the rival lions grew stronger. The tension was palpable, but still they did not strike. It was as though the enemy was waiting for something, waiting for a moment of weakness. Jabari's mind raced, trying to anticipate their next move. He knew that every passing day made the situation more dangerous. The longer they waited, the more likely it was that they would be caught off guard. One night, under the cover of darkness, the first attack came. It was swift and brutal. A group of rival lions, led by a fierce and cunning male named Kovu, ambushed the pride's outskirts. They were outnumbered, but their aggression and ruthlessness were unmatched. Jabari's heart pounded as he heard the clash of teeth and claws in the distance. He knew that the battle had begun. Jabari and Zuri were among the first to respond, their roars echoing through the trees as they rallied the pride. The younger lions, though nervous, followed their lead. The six had fought before, and they had survived before, but this time it felt different. There was no guarantee of victory. The battle raged on throughout the night, the air thick with the scent of blood and fear. The rival lions were relentless, pushing the pride to the brink. Jabari fought with everything he had, his body battered and bruised, but his resolve unbroken. He knew that the survival of pride depended on him, and on their unity. He could not let them fall apart now, not when they had come so far. As the first light of dawn broke through the trees, the battle began to slow. The rival lions had been forced back, their numbers dwindling, but Jabari knew that the fight was far from over. This was just the beginning. The pride had survived, but they had been scarred by the battle, and the enemy would not stop. Kovu and his pride would be back. As Jabari stood, panting and bloodied, his gaze swept over the battlefield. The pride was battered, but they were alive. And in that moment, Jabari understood something. Survival wasn't just about strength. It was about resilience, about finding the will to keep fighting, even when everything seemed lost. He turned to Zuri, who stood beside him, her eyes filled with the same resolve. "We'll fight again," he said softly, his voice steady. "But next time we'll be ready." And so, the six prepared for what was to come, knowing that the battle for their future was far from over. The forest may have been vast, but the lions who ruled it were not invincible. They had survived this attack, but the true test of their strength had yet to come. The battle had ended, but its scars were visible on every lion in the pride. Their once strong and unified territory was now marred by the violence that had erupted in the heart of the African forest. The ground was stained with blood, and the air still carried the scent of smoke and fear. Jabari stood at the edge of the battlefield, his eyes scanning the land that he had fought so hard to protect. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. The pride had survived, but it came at a cost. Zuri approached him quietly, her paws heavy with exhaustion. She was bruised and battered, but her spirit remained unbroken. The battle had been a harsh reminder of the brutality that lay just beneath the surface of the forest. Rival lions like Kovu would not stop. They would never stop, not until they had taken what they believed was rightfully theirs. Jabari let out a low growl, a mix of frustration and determination. "We've held them off for now, but I know this won't be the last time. They will return." Zuri nodded solemnly. "And next time we might not be so lucky." The truth of her words settled heavily in Jabari's chest. They had fought with everything they had, and yet they had only managed to push the rival lions back for a short time. The forest was a dangerous place, and the six could not afford to be complacent. The battle had revealed the vulnerability that lay within the pride, and Jabari knew that he had to act quickly to ensure their survival. The pride had suffered losses, some minor, others more serious. The younger lions, though they had shown courage, had been deeply shaken by the ferocity of the battle. Their trust in Jabari, though still intact, had wavered in the face of such overwhelming danger. He had been their leader, their protector, but he could not deny the truth. The pride was not as strong as it needed to be. For the next few days, the pride focused on healing. They licked their wounds, both physical and emotional, and Jabari took it upon himself to check on each lion, offering reassurance and support. Zuri was his right hand, helping him to maintain order and unity within the pride. But even as they healed, Jabari knew that the calm was only temporary. The forest had been disturbed, and predators like Kovu would not allow the pride to rest for long. The young lions, who had once been so eager to prove themselves, were now more hesitant. They lingered in the shadows, watching the older lions with wary eyes. Jabari knew that their courage would need to be rebuilt. They needed to feel the strength of the pride, to understand that survival was not just about fighting, it was about unity, trust, and resilience. Without these, the pride would crumble. Zuri could sense Jabari's inner turmoil. "You're carrying too much on your shoulders," she said softly. "You don't have to protect them all by yourself." Jabari looked at her, his gaze weary. "But I do. I have to. I'm their leader. If I falter, they will too." She stepped closer to him, pressing her body against his for comfort. "You're not alone in this, Jabari. We're all in this together. You've shown us the way before, and you will again." Her words, though comforting, did little to ease the weight of his responsibility. The reality of leadership was harsh and unrelenting. Jabari had always been a protector, a warrior, but now, more than ever, He had to be something more. He had to be a strategist, a guide, a symbol of hope. He had to show the pride that they could survive, even when everything seemed against them. Days passed, and the pride slowly regained their strength. But the fear of future attacks lingered in the air. Jabari had to make a decision. He could no longer wait for the next attack to come. He needed to take the offensive. The pride needed to show the rival lions that they were not afraid, that they would not allow their territory to be stolen. One night, under the cover of darkness, Jabari called for a meeting. His voice was steady, his eyes filled with purpose. "We will strike first," he declared. "We cannot wait for Kovu and his lions to come to us. We will show them that we will fight for this land, for our future." The pride gathered around him, their faces filled with a mix of determination and fear. They had seen the brutality of battle, but they trusted Jabari. They would follow him, just as they had in the past. The younger lions, though hesitant, knew that this was the only way to ensure their survival. Zuri stood by Jabari's side, her eyes filled with pride. "We stand together," she said firmly. "No lion is left behind." With their resolve set, the pride began to prepare for the offensive. Jabari and Zuri spent the next few days organizing the pride, planning their attack on Kovu and his group. The terrain of the forest, once a place of refuge, now seemed like a labyrinth of shadows and danger. But Jabari was determined to use every advantage they had. They would strike swiftly, silently, and without mercy. As the day of the attack drew closer, the tension and the pride grew. The younger lions, who had never been part of a large-scale assault, felt the weight of what was to come. Their anxiety was palpable, but Jabari's leadership calmed their nerves. He reminded them that they were not just fighting for themselves, but for their future. They were not just lions. They were a family, and that bond was their greatest strength. The night before the attack, Jabari could not sleep. His mind raced with thoughts of the upcoming battle. The forest, now eerily quiet, seemed to close in around him. He knew that they were taking a huge risk, but he had no choice. If they did not strike now, they would be vulnerable forever. As he sat alone, his thoughts were interrupted by Zuri's soft voice. "We'll make it through this," she said, sitting beside him. Jabari turned to her, his gaze filled with gratitude. "I hope so." And so, the pride, battered but resolute, prepared for the final confrontation that would determine their future. The battle for survival was not just about strength. It was about the courage to stand firm in the face of overwhelming odds, to fight for what was theirs, and to never back down. The moon hung high in the sky, casting a cold, silvery light over the African forest. The air was thick with tension, the stillness of the night betraying the storm that was about to unfold. Jabari stood at the forefront of the pride, his heart pounding in his chest. His once majestic mane, now matted with the dust and grime of battle, framed a face set with determination. The time had come. The pride would not wait any longer. It was time to take their land back. Behind him, the pride gathered, their bodies pressed close together. The younger lions, though nervous, stood tall. The older members of the pride, bruised and scarred from the previous battle, wore expressions of grim resolve. Zuri, his right hand, stood by his side, her eyes sharp and focused. She was ready. They all were. Jabari took a deep breath and turned to face them. "Tonight, we fight for our future," he said, his voice low but filled with the weight of authority. "We take the first step towards reclaiming what's ours. We fight not just for territory, but for our pride, for our lives. We fight as one." The pride roared in unison, their voices rising into the night, a chorus of defiance and unity. The echoes of their roars sent a shiver through the forest, but it wasn't fear, it was power. The six had faced challenges before, but tonight they were going to make their mark. Jabari could feel it in his bones. This was the moment that would define them. With silent, coordinated steps, they began their trek into the depths of the forest. The path was familiar to Jabari, a winding trail that led deep into rival territory. As they moved through the underbrush, their bodies moving like shadows, Jabari's mind raced. Every decision, every movement could mean life or death. He couldn't afford to make a mistake. Zuri moved beside him, her presence a comfort. "We're ready," she whispered. He nodded but didn't speak. He couldn't afford to show any uncertainty. The pride needed his strength, his unwavering conviction. They had already lost so much. He couldn't let them lose again. As they neared the heart of rival territory, the tension mounted. The scent of unfamiliar lions grew stronger, and the ground beneath their paws felt heavier with each step. Jabari's ears flicked nervously at every sound, every crack of a branch. But the pride pressed on, their movements synchronized, their minds focused on the mission ahead. They were no longer the victims. They were the hunters. Finally, they reached a clearing where Kovu and his lions had made camp. The moonlight illuminated the scene, casting long shadows across the ground. Jabari could see the figures of rival lions lying in wait, their eyes glinting in the darkness. They had known the six would come. It was a trap, but Jabari would not back down. Without a word, he signaled to the pride. The attack began in a blur of movement. Zuri led the charge, her powerful legs propelling her forward. The pride followed in a wave, each lion focused on the target ahead. The rival lions were caught off guard, scrambling to defend their territory. But Jabari was faster. He pounced on the first lion he saw, his claws sinking deep into its flesh. The sound of battle filled the air, roars, growls, and the sickening thud of bodies colliding. Jabari moved with deadly precision, his eyes locked onto Kovu, who was trying to rally his lions. The two leaders locked eyes, and for a moment, the entire forest seemed to hold its breath. This was it. This was the moment that would decide everything. Kovu charged at Jabari, his teeth bared, ready to tear his rival apart. But Jabari was ready. He leaped to the side just as Kovu lunged, narrowly avoiding the fatal blow. He spun around and swiped at Kovu's side, leaving deep gashes in the lion's thick fur. Kovu roared in pain, but there was no mercy in Jabari's heart. This was a fight for survival, and Jabari would not let his pride be destroyed. The battle raged on, but Jabari's focus remained on Kovu. He could hear the sounds of the pride fighting around him, but his eyes never left his rival. He knew this was the final confrontation. There could be no hesitation, no second chances. One of them would walk away victorious. The other would fall. As Jabari and Kovu clashed again, the air was filled with the sounds of their struggle, roars of pain, the tearing of flesh, the thud of powerful paws on the ground. Jabari's heart pounded in his chest, the adrenaline coursing through his veins. Every muscle in his body screamed for him to finish this, to end it once and for all. And then, in a moment of brutal clarity, Jabari found his opening. Kovu's guard was down and Jabari struck. With a powerful swipe, he landed a blow to Kovu's throat, his claws sinking deep into the soft flesh. Kovu's roar turned into a gurgle as blood poured from the wound. He stumbled back, his legs failing him, before collapsing onto the ground. For a moment, there was silence. The battle seemed to freeze in time, the forest holding its breath. And then, with a final, guttural growl, Kovu fell still. The six had won. Jabari stood over his fallen rival, his chest heaving with exertion. His body ached, his fur stained with the blood of battle, but there was no time to rest. The pride still needed him. He turned to face his lions, his heart swelling with pride. They had done it. They had reclaimed their land. But even as the pride began to regroup, Jabari knew that their survival would always be a constant battle. The forest was unforgiving, and there would always be new threats, new challengers. But tonight, they had proven that they were not just survivors. They were rulers of the forest, and they would defend their reign with blood and fury.